and it's the opposite.
Where is the presence of God when they're not joyful things? Actually, quite frequently, people tell me just the opposite. They tell me times which are absolutely terrible. I've heard people say that my father was dying and I was holding my father's hand, and there was something about the connection between my father and me, even as he expired, that I would call the presence of God. So in fact, when I think of God, I don't think of God intervening. The person died. But I think of God's presence at that moment, and that goes back to what I said yesterday about God visiting the sick and sitting at the pillow and our reflecting God. So there are examples of God presence even in terrible moments, you know. All right. What about people dying as a result of war and starvation? So there you're asking a question about how could God allow that sort of thing to happen? I understand. That's a very good question, and it inevitably comes up. So here's my quick answer. Why does bad things happen to good people? That's essentially the question, all right? So there are three beliefs about God that are traditional. One is that God is all-knowing. So if you're suffering, God knows. The other one is that God is all good. So naturally, God wants to make things better. What kind of God wouldn't want to make things better? And God is all-powerful, so God could make things better. So therefore, if God knows you're suffering and God wants to help you and God can help you, why doesn't God do it if God is God? My short answer is, of those three things, you get 2 out of 3. Now, all three of them can't be true. So which one do you want to give up on? That God is all-knowing, that God is all good, or that God is all-powerful? I give up the one that God is all-powerful. And there is actually a lot of precedent in Judaism for saying that. So quite a very significant part of Jewish thought maintains that God could have been all-powerful, but what kind of universe would that be? God would have to be constantly entering your life and making life perfect for everybody. So what God did instead is, I'm talking in anthropomorphisms, as if God really were a person, but I don't mean that. So God creates a world, or allows a world to be created, however you want to think about it. There's a force behind creation, I'll accept that too, in which there are certain laws, and I talked about that, 4 laws for everything. But that means those laws have to operate. God can't say, I'm going to make 4 laws except sometimes not. So the laws of the universe work. When God can't enter into history and change things for us, God can at least be a presence. And that's what Job was told, in effect. Not that I could make things better for you, but I didn't punish you. That's not what it is. And at the end, God talks to Job, and Job has a presence there. So it's about God's presence, and that's what I said again about the bed. Anything else on your mind from any of the conversations? Yeah. All right. Do I think God is a being with separate consciousness? The short answer is I don't know. I really don't know. Here's an analogy. Do you know where your stomach is? Point to your stomach. Exactly. You can have a stomach ache, right? Do you know where your waist is? Point to your waist. Can you have a waist ache? No, nobody ever says, my waist is aching. But we know what a waist is. So there are different ways of referring even to concrete things like our own body. Do you know where your brain is? Of course. Do you have a mind? Of course. Where's your mind? Well, we don't know. So there are we use terms like mind or waist. I mean, that's a little simpler one. Those are a different category of describing reality. The problem is that when we use those words, we tend to think they are the same category as stomach and brain. And so when I can't find my mind, like, where is my mind? I mean, I don't know. Doesn't mean I don't have one. I know what it means to change my mind. I know what it means when somebody convinces me and I now think differently. Now, you will say to me as a brain surgeon, that's your brain. I can tell you how it works. There are neurons. I accept all of that. But that doesn't completely do justice to my experience as a human being, where I know I have a mind. Another example is soul. Where's your soul? Well, I mean, I don't know. The soul is not a thing. The soul is a way of describing an aspect of humanity, of me, of you. So there are things like soul, mind, waste, that we use to describe the physical, but in another realm, another way of discussing it. God is the kind of thing that is a noun like waste and mind and soul, but you can't locate God. I can't describe God to you. I can only say there are experiences that show themselves where I'm willing to say that that is the presence of God. Now, for some people, they say, I experience God as a force in nature. I accept that. Other people say, I experience God as a one-on-one, talks to me. I'm talking to God. That's fine. I can't describe God because God doesn't fit the bill of a physical person that has limitations. I can only describe what people say God means to them. And I'm open to all the descriptions of human experience, and I say that's just fine. That's the best we can do. I don't think God has a body, but is God a separate being with consciousness? It depends what you mean by being. God is other than. To think that God is like us, being, is a category mistake. God doesn't fit that category. God's in a different category, like soul. Do you think you have a soul that you can put to bed at night or that wakes up with you? I mean, like, exactly. I don't know, because where is it? So the spiritual vocabulary is about that part of life that doesn't fit into the materiality of the scientific world, but is not on that account unscientific because it shows itself in experience, and we can measure an experience, and we know when those experiences happen. Yeah. I am. When I talk about spiritual things, you can call it a different dimension if you like. Depends what you mean by dimension.
Well, like physically point to yourself.
Yes.
Physically point to your brain.
That's correct. That's correct. I accept that. Yes. What about tradition? Okay. What role does tradition play in prayer? In general. Yes. That's a very important question. I tend to talk about change a lot because we live in an era where change is very, very obvious. And you say, yeah, but what about tradition? Tradition is very important to me. I live in Jewish tradition. I couldn't imagine not being in Jewish tradition. Tradition is this long history of the way people have done things. But the truth is, real tradition is changing. The rabbis did not pray differently than the people in the Bible. Moses Maimonides understood the rabbis better than most, but was very different than them. He was philosophical. He didn't think God was a person. He really thought that God was a force more than anything else. But he said, well, you know, we have to use human language that people understand. If I look at the grand scheme of Jewish tradition, what impresses me most is the ability of the Jewish tradition to change, and that's why we're here today. If we were not able to change what we do, if our tradition were static, we would have died a long time ago. There were Jews who believed in not changing anything, a blessed memory. There are people who died out, people who said, we need a temple, we need a temple, we need a temple. Well, There are none of those people around anymore. And I could point to other examples. So Jewish tradition has built into it the demand for change. It happens at the very beginning of the rabbis when they say in their metaphoric way, there's a Torah that was given at Sinai. That's written down. And there's also an oral law, as you know, because you studied it. There's a Torah Shebe'al Peh that was handed down at Sinai, but it never got written down. So whenever rabbis interpret the Torah differently, then we say, oh, that must be the oral law that got handed down. It's a metaphoric way of making for change. Jews have always insisted on change. Authentic Judaism is not doing what our ancestors did, but doing what they would have done if they were alive today. No more questions. We're finished. I'm sorry. Yeah.
And so these are questions. Oh, I was going to say my father is kind of a well-known philosopher, and so these are questions we would just talk about at dinner, So I'm very. But the one thing that I find that I'd love to know what Judaism thinks of when you were talking about earlier in the day when you were interpreting the prayer, and God made everybody. He was lonely and he wanted people and he made everything. Where did God come from? How is that explained?
Adon Olam Asher Malach. I mean, the answer is that God's in a different category. This goes back to Aristotle, as your father would have said to you, right? Aristotle thought there was a cause for everything. And then Aristotle said, well, what about the first cause? What caused the first cause? And so that's the same question. And Aristotle then concluded that there must be a first cause, which by definition is not caused by anything else. We can't imagine such a thing. But logic had it that there had to be such a thing, or else you'd have an endless regress, turtles all the way down kind of thing, You'd never get to the beginning, but there had to be a beginning. So he imagined a first cause, which by definition is not caused by anything else. And he said, if everything else were to perish, that would still exist. But if that perished, everything else would have to exist. So by first cause, he didn't mean necessarily temporal. He meant simply a cause that undergirds the existence of everything else at every moment in time. Maimonides took that and called that God. So Maimonides thought God was that. God was not a person. God was that first cause, but that on which everything depends, such that if everything else died, that first cause would exist. But if that first cause were to pass away, which it couldn't, but if it did, then everything else would die. He had a very heady understanding of God. God then, you can't ask the question of where did God come from? Because by definition, God didn't come from anything. And that's God's the beginning. And that's why Adon Olam says God was the first and the last and will always be, and you can't compare. God's in a different category. Yes.
I also think there's another way to thank you. I think there's another way to look at God in this sense, and that because we as Jews have so much belief in free will and believe to a certain extent and believe that God is good and we are created in the image of God, therefore we are all good unless we somehow prove otherwise. But even then, God gives us so many blessings that when we don't have all the blessings, then we understand that there is some other explanation, and perhaps that God is a partner and a reaffirming partner. So I think of it as reaffirmation, not just in times of crisis.
Thank you. Somebody over here, I think. Yes.
Basically, the question is, why did we as people need to invent God? Like, why, if God is the first and the last, it implies that's limited. Why can't we just exist as we are without God?
So the question is, why do we have to invent God? And if God is the first and the last, very good. But why can't we just exist as we are without God? Well, the answer is twofold. First of all, wait, what was how do we frame the first part of your question? Invent. Depends what you mean by invent. I mean, somebody invented electricity, but didn't really invent it. The universe had the makings of electricity, and somebody figured out how to put it together. So most inventions are not out of nothing. They are simply harnessing what's already in the universe in a unique way and helping us access that which is in the universe, but we didn't know we could access it that way before. I mean, how do we invent a new medication? You know, it's not like the chemicals weren't there, but somebody figured out how you could, if you could put certain chemicals together in a certain way, you could get a certain kind of medication out of it. So invention is not necessarily altogether de novo. Invention is largely our intervening into the world in some way. So invention is more like intervention in a way, in a creative way. So similarly, I think there is such a thing as God's presence in the universe. We don't necessarily have to intervene to find it, just the way you didn't have to intervene to find some medication. But it occurs to some human beings at some point in time, in fact, to people all over the universe, that there was more to life. And then they needed a name for it. And so they tended to call it the equivalent of what we say God. I mean, once you decide there is such a thing as an experience of X, then you want to name it something other than X. Unless, of course, you've just bought Twitter, that's different. So we need a name for it. So I think of God, I think of the word God as not sacrosanct. You can take it or leave it. I think of the word God as a placeholder for whatever is most profound, ultimate, transcendent, that sometimes enters into our lives in remarkable and we would call almost saving ways. If you don't want to call it God, it's fine. If you want to say there's a force for good, that's okay with me. So I just say that human beings have discovered over time that materiality, what we now call science, does not exhaust the wholeness of the human person and the human experience. And so there's something beyond, and we've known how long have human beings been around? We've known that there is something more. I like that moreness. Another philosopher says, without God, we discover, look at the world today, look at your life, look at anything you want. We have the experience of something missing. There's something more that we want to fill the hole. And so the sense that we are connected in a profound way to that which we call God, that allows us to, in my first lecture, to draw the dots, to connect the dots better. So it's a dot, if you like, that we call God, and somehow we find it in our lives. We put it into our picture, and the picture comes into greater focus, and we feel like there's more of a sense of wholeness. One or two more questions, and then we'll end, okay? Yes?
So back to one of your earlier set of brilliant teachings, blessings. So we have blessings of gratitude, we have blessings of praise, we have petitionary prayer. If God is experiential and not a puppeteer that's all-powerful, why do we have so much emphasis on petitionary prayer, and why don't we have education for adults and kids coming up to understand an experiential God?
I like better the first part of the question when you said it was a brilliant teaching, actually. I'm not sure I can do justice to any of these questions. I feel like rushed. I want to get as many people in as possible, and I know we have to finish in just a few minutes. So my apologies for kind of rushing answers and talking too quickly and maybe cutting you off. I really don't mean to do that, and I apologize. Really, I do. If I were local, I'd come back tonight or tomorrow or something. The first question has to do with why do we have petitions? If God is a presence rather than an answerer, right? Not than a grantor of petitions. The first thing to say is I have no idea whether God grants petitions or not. My experience is that God does not. Otherwise, why do bad things happen to good people? But I have very many people who say they're convinced that God actually does grant petitions. And so I'm willing to say, if that's your experience, I won't deny it. I never deny people's experience. So I don't want to leave by putting an absolute negative on anything that people say about God. I am open. Maybe by tomorrow I'll figure out, or it'll be revealed to me how God intervenes here, but not there. I don't expect it, but like a good scientist, I wait to see what, science keeps changing its views. It depends upon how things develop, and maybe things will develop differently. So if people feel that God does respond in your life, far be it from me to say that God doesn't. Having said that, however, I tend to think what works for me better is that God is a presence. Why then do I continue the petitions? The answer, I think, simply is that when we pray, we don't necessarily only pray so that the petitions get answered. Much of this drama that I called worship has to do with the full expression of the human person. There is something about the mode of prayer that expresses the depth of our human being in ways that other modes don't. I understand you can write a poem, and I can be very moved by poetry. People write songs, I can cry at songs. I see that. But for the average person, if you're hurting, there's nothing like saying, God help me. Nothing like describing it. So when you're hurting, either alone, you say, you have nothing else to say. Now what? God help me, right? Now, you don't really expect at that moment God will. It's not like you said, hey, you didn't hear me the first time? That doesn't occur. You say it again and again because you want to express yourself. Part of us as human is the expression of something very deep within us that presupposes a connection to something more. So naturally, when we've been robbed of something so we feel incomplete, we've lost a loved one, we're sick and can't walk, can't talk, can't do whatever. When those things happen and we feel at a loss, we naturally reach out and try to recover or to absorb the moreness that we know to be part of human nature. And we have to do that through words. And since we have to do that through words, the way we do that is through what we call petitions. And we know that we keep on saying the petition, even if we don't believe God will help us, and it didn't work the first 25,000 times, and it doesn't mean I give up on it usually, because I find myself doing it anyway. And that's not because I'm stupid. It's because I'm human. So petitions are part of the human attempt to reach out beyond in moments of trial and to admit our infirmity, to say what we don't have. So that's why there are petitions, and I think we'll always have petitions. And that's why we have a prayer for the sick. I don't know if God will help. That's another story. I have no idea. But I do know that when I'm singing Misha Beirach with everybody, and I've done it for, my people dear to me, I feel better just having expressed it. Not to mention, they now know that my mother was sick or my daughter was sick or something. And they come over and they help me. And that's the presence of God. They're at my bedside. They're at the end of the bed at that moment. So petitions privately are a natural outgrowth of humanity at its finest, not its worst, and trying to find the more. And petitions in community are all the more necessary, because then people reach back out to us. And in a way, the petition did sort of get granted. Not that you're better, but you have now a little peace of mind you didn't have before. Okay, so what I want to do now is just move on slightly, and I apologize because I got only a few minutes. And what I want to do is now not answer questions so much. Let's find out what you're taking away from this weekend. So just take a deep breath for a minute and think. How have you changed? What have you learned? I don't like the word learning, because that means what cognitively, what sentence can you make that's really smart? I don't mean that. Well, give me a moment to be clearer. What are you taking away with you might be a feeling, or a sense that, or an insight that, or an understanding that. So the kind of answer you can give to me, I'd like them to be short. We can get as many as possible in the next few minutes. You might say, I'm carrying away the feeling that, or I'm carrying away the insight that, or I'm carrying away the experience of something that happened. So I'd like you to finish sentences like that, and we'll collect them. And then we'll sort of see what everybody is carrying away, and that will be the lesson that we can learn, not just our own personal carrying away, but what other people say. You'll say, oh yeah, I remember that too. So take a second so we get to hear one another, and then we'll just finish that up. And then, Gail, where are you? Where are we going from here, or are we staying here? Courtyard. All right. So, what are you carrying away? We'll just start over here, and I'll go all across the room.
I'm carrying away the the 4 ways of deriving spirituality from Jewish tradition that you outlined last night: Israel, Torah, the bedside, and brachot.
What are you carrying?
I think I believe in God more than I did when I started.
I feel a more insight to prayer and God.
I feel that when the rabbi says it's time for your own prayers, that whatever I've been praying or however I've been praying is exactly how I should be praying.
I'm taking away a different interpretation of the Torah. I never thought of it as a life cycle piece. And that's
I'm feeling even more grounded and comfortable in my Judaism.
I feel a little more freer with my spiritual side of me.
I'm taking away an excitement about a new path going forward, and an understanding of spirituality, which I never had.
I'm feeling a confirmation in things that I've always thought but didn't really have the vocabulary or the confidence of what I thought. And so being here has given me that.
Thank you. Over here? Anyone in the back?
Hi, I feel blessed to be part of a community that is open enough and loving enough to be at this pivotal point that Professor Hoffman is talking about in change and transformation.
I love the little line, find your line.
Find your line in prayer.
I loved how you described spirituality last night. So when I read the different books as we go through the year, I'll be thinking about that, and also a different way of seeing Adonalam.
Yeah, I think you touched on and gave me some really good clarity over something I've had difficulty with for quite a long time, which is the specificity of God in the liturgy and how one can look at it more as a mantra and the music of it and how the feeling it gives you. And I think that was great.
Anyone else? What you're carrying away?
Thank you. 2 points very quickly. First, an overwhelming sense of gratitude for you and the opportunity to learn with you and study with you. And second, I'm feeling more comfortable with the answers that I've never been able, the questions I've never been able to answer, that it's okay.
It seems that 90% of the time when someone finds out I'm a rabbi, the first thing they say to me is, well, I'm not very Jewish. I mean, I'm Jewish, but I'm not like, I don't go to temple, and I'm really not very Jewish. And I think the gift of the last 24 hours is to expand and validate that as humans and Jews, there are infinite ways to be Jewish.
Thank you for being here. Oh, and can you recommend a book that addresses, or have you written a book about this?
I will refer you to Rabbi Pomerantz, who knows some of my books and can help you with what you want, because it's a conversation that I can't go into now. There's so many issues, and I'm sure she'll find something. What I'm carrying away is this marvelous 24 hours I've spent with you. I've been to countless synagogues in the last 50 years, countless. And I know a good synagogue when I see one. What a community you have. What magnificent leadership you have from Rabbi Pomerantz and from the other rabbis and the cantor with her. Where's the cantor? Is he still here? I mean, this is an exceptional place. I'm carrying away gratitude of my own for having been with you, for all the preparations that you made. I just drop into your life for 24 hours and do what I do. But the amount of work that goes into making this happen is massive. So for all the people who put the time in, some of whom I've met and some of whom I haven't, I'm enormously grateful. To Marta, what can I say? Wouldn't happen without you. You made it possible. I mean, that's an enormous gift that you've given the synagogue. And so to the two of you, Marta, Paul, what you've given is massive. I think my ability to fit into it for 1 year and be part of it all is a very great gift to me. And so I want to thank you all for the love you've shown, the attention, the patience to sit through the whole thing, and your thoughtfulness, which was evident all along the way. As you leave, I hope one of the things you'll take away is the possibility that this is a God moment, and that this doesn't happen by accident. And a lot of people worked hard, but then when it was all done, something more happened. And I will happy to take my share of responsibility, and thanks for that. But you should not minimize who you are either. What I do is a relationship, and what I do works only when there are people on the other side in such marvelous dialogue with me. So pray God that you will continue in your health and your happiness and your search for spirituality, and in building a community that will have ripples and impact far beyond yourselves. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much. We're going to have an opportunity just briefly to come together in a closing circle in the courtyard where we can express some more gratitude. And let's just go right out so that we can conclude in 10 minutes. Thank you.